All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about one of the biggest, most ambitious transformations in India's economic history. Seriously, it's a complete overhaul of the country's employment laws, a move that's going to affect hundreds of millions of people.
Okay, so just try to imagine this for a second. You're trying to run a business, or maybe you're just a worker trying to figure out your rights. And to do that, you have to navigate this crazy maze of 29 different and often conflicting central labor laws. For decades, that was the reality in India. A lot of these laws were super old, almost relics from a totally different era, and they created this massive headache for everyone involved.
But now, in what is a truly monumental shift, all of that has been streamlined. The government basically took this incredibly tangled web of regulations and decided to untangle the whole thing.
And here's the result. That entire complicated framework has been simplified into just 4 modern, much more comprehensive codes. It's a huge change, really, designed to bring clarity, efficiency, and get everything in line with the 21st century economy. So, you might be asking, why go through all this trouble? Why was such a massive overhaul so necessary? Well, to really get what's new, we've got to first understand what was wrong with the old system.
You know, this quote right here really hits the nail on the head. Fragmentation, complexity, and weak enforcement. The old system with some laws that literally dated back to the colonial era wasn't just confusing, it was seen as a major barrier to growth. It got so complicated that it actually encouraged some businesses to stay small just to avoid all the regulatory red tape.
And wow, this table really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? Just look at the sheer scale of the old compliance requirements. You had multiple registrations, a bunch of different licenses, and over 30 separate returns to file. The new codes, they get rid of all that and replace it with a single, unified, and electronic process. So much simpler. So how exactly do you fix a maze like that? Let's take a look at the solution. This great consolidation wasn't some snap decision. As you're about to see, this was a long time in the making.
So the idea for this big change was actually first put on the table way back in 2002. Then, after years and years of discussions, Parliament finally passed the new codes between 2019 and 2020. And the final step is getting them fully brought into force across the country by late 2025. So yeah, it's been a multi-stage process, not just flipping a switch overnight.
And here's basically how that consolidation works. They took those 29 old laws and logically grouped them into 4 main buckets. You've got one code for wages, another for industrial relations, a third for social security, and a fourth that covers all things related to occupational safety, health, and working conditions. Okay, but what did these new codes actually change on the ground? This is where things get really interesting for both employers and employees. One of the absolute biggest changes is this. A brand new standardized definition of wages. It's being called the 50% rule. It means that all those allowances in your salary can't make up more than half of your total pay. Anything over that 50% mark now gets counted as part of your basic wage. And why does that matter? Because it could mean higher contributions to your social security funds like Provident Fund and gratuity. And the goal here is pretty clear. By making sure more of an employee's total pay is counted as their basic wage, the system is essentially forcing higher contributions into long-term savings. This is a big structural change, and it's all aimed at boosting an employee's financial security when they eventually retire.
And it goes way beyond just wages. The codes bring in a whole wave of new protections. We're talking about things like mandatory appointment letters to make employment more formal, a national minimum wage that applies to everyone, and extending Social Security to millions of people who were totally left out before.
And this part right here is absolutely crucial. It really brings the law into the 21st century. For the very first time, it formally recognizes that massive workforce of gig and platform workers, your delivery drivers, your freelance coders, and it starts the process of bringing them into the Social Security system. That's a huge deal. So that brings us to the big picture. What's the overall impact on India's huge workforce in all its industries? As you can probably guess, a change this massive has sparked a lot of debate. On one hand, the government and industry are hailing these codes as a landmark pro-growth reform. They say it simplifies compliance and will boost investment. But on the other hand, labor unions have raised some serious concerns. They're arguing that the changes might prioritize employer flexibility over worker protections, and they've even called for strikes to protest them. So as India starts to weave these massive reforms into its economic fabric, what does the future actually hold? Well, the story definitely isn't over yet. The thing is, this whole rollout is still a work in progress. the central codes have been passed, but individual state governments still need to finalize their own rules to get everything fully implemented. And this transition period is creating its own little ecosystem. We're seeing new digital platforms pop up to handle compliance, legal challenges are testing gray areas in court, and investors are paying more attention to labor practices as part of their ESG metrics.
The official line from the government is crystal clear. They see these codes as a foundational step, something that's essential for building a more self-reliant, competitive, and fair nation for everybody.
So here's the bottom line. The intent is to modernize, to simplify, to make things better. But the ultimate success of this truly monumental reform, that's going to depend on how it's actually handled by employers, employees, and regulators in the years to come. It is without a doubt a defining moment, but the big question remains, will it really deliver a better future for India's 640 million strong workforce?